Outside of the Albuquerque Museum, a collection of bronze conquistadors look northward, much in the same way their historic counterparts did more than 500 years ago. It was the arrival of Spanish colonizers, some searching for the famed cities of gold, some seeking to expand the reach of their nation's footprint. Yet the work of art today stands without its central figure, a vacancy that was born in June of 2020. As the wave of protests for social justice swept across the country, Albuquerque's La Jornada became ground zero in the local discussion of America's inconvenient history. Protesters clashed with members of the New Mexico Civil Guard, leading to the shooting of one man and the arrest of several others. All over a statue.
For us, it represents, of course, the ongoing system and structure of colonization, but then it also represents the long-standing traditions of resistance against colonization that Native people here, starting with Pueblo folks, have been engaging in for centuries.
When Don Juan de Oñate and his exploration party set forth on their journey into the New Mexico territory in April of 1598, they came with the goals of expanding the Spanish Empire as well as Catholicism by establishing missions in the territory.
He was one of the first Europeans to come here with almost 400 to 500 persons who literally wanted to settle into the New World and make an attempt, as clumsy and awkward and sometimes violent as it was, to coexist and literally integrate with that population.
As they traveled up the Rio Grande, Oñate made land grants to his colonists, empowering them to enslave Native Americans. Tensions between the Spanish colonizers and Native peoples reached a tipping point when 11 of Oñate's men were killed by Acoma Puebloans in October of 1598. Months later, in the frigid temperatures of January 1599, Oñate ordered the pueblo to be destroyed, citing insurrection against the Spanish crown. The Acoma Massacre, as it has come to be known, left an estimated 800 to 1,000 Puebloans dead. 500 survivors were put on trial by Oñate, with men and women over 12 years of age forced into slavery for nearly 20 years. Some men, over the age of 25, had their toes amputated in a gruesome act of punishment.
So the toppling of statues is a kind of truth-telling moment, I think, where we're being forced to reckon with what we have accepted as a truism in the public realm versus what actually has happened.
The problem many have against monuments to historic figures like Oñate is that they tell only one side of the story, one that glorifies accomplishments and turns a blind eye to atrocities.
That the realm of public history is incredibly powerful because what often happens in that realm is that certain versions of history or certain figures are glorified, they're honored, they're celebrated, right? When you celebrate a certain figure, you celebrate a certain version of history, what you're basically saying is that that is the version of history that matters more than any other understanding of history.
For example, here at Kit Carson Park in Albuquerque, many people may see the name and think of the heroic frontiersman who played a key role in the American expansion into California, fought off Confederate threats in New Mexico, and is buried in Taos. What they may not think of is the scorched earth campaign he led against the Navajo Nation and their subsequent imprisonment at Bosque Redondo, which led to more than 3,000 deaths of the Navajo and Mescalero Apache. In fact, in the summer of 2014, the city of Taos wrestled with the name of their own Kit Carson Park. It was temporarily named Red Willow Park, but ultimately lost the moniker after a 3-1 vote from city council members. Carson's name was restored to the park, with some saying the initial move to change it was a move of, quote, political correctness.
The significance of what we recognize them as having contributed is something that's a little different than what the person did as a whole.
Raffi Andonian is a historian and author of the book Creating Space for Conflicted Histories, which poses 4 questions he says lawmakers, city officials, and the public as a whole should ask in determining if monuments or memorials are appropriate. The first question is, why remember?
That's really getting at the significance. What is the significance of what you're talking about here, what the story is?
La Jornada aims to depict the arrival of Spanish settlers and the agricultural, spiritual, and technological influence they brought with them, an influence that is still felt throughout the Southwest. Number 2 is what is the history to be remembered?
You have to figure out what happened specifically there that makes that location so particular.
In the case of Oñate's statue in Alcalde, it stood near Okeawinge, the home of Oñate's colonial government.
These statues represent like the untold history of, let's say, U.S. expansion.
For example, nowhere on this plaque commemorating Kit Carson Park in Albuquerque does it mention the thousands of Navajo who were forcibly removed from their homeland and forced to walk more than 300 miles to Fort Sumner. The same goes for Kit Carson Memorial Cemetery. The historic marker mentions notable Taosueños that are buried there, the rebellion of 1847, and the death of Governor Charles Bent.
And question 3 is, what is the meaning of remembering? What does it mean to remember? And that's asking more, what's your intention here? You can usually, are you commemorating? Are you celebrating? Are you glorifying? Are you condemning?
Proponents of historical preservation argue that by removing statues like Oñate's, we're removing elements of public history from the larger population.
To deny his influence and to deny the contributions that he made, even in terms of, as I said, animal life and technology, is a real disservice to this thing called history.
Yet many believe and argue that statues like La Jornada tell an incomplete history, one that continues to be written.
Just because formal colonization, like Spanish colonialism, ended, doesn't mean that colonization as a larger structure has ended for Native people. It's just morphed into something different.
The last question in Andonian's book may be the most important when it comes to the proper way to confront the complicated history of New Mexico and the United States.
Question 4 is how remember? So how do you use a complicated, a place that has so many perspectives, so many emotions, so many different stories and ways of looking at something? How do you use the site to convey these many layers?
The answer to this is the gray area artists, lawmakers, historians, and the public now must wrestle with.
Public history and public art in a museum or in a plaza in Santa Fe, it's largely about the consumption of indigeneity and the consumption of Native culture. It is not about honesty, historical honesty.
History should be additive, not subtractive. But what's missing is people actually getting together that have variant perspectives, that are willing to, as dispassionately as possible, have intellectual, verifiable, empirically verifiable conversations about these issues that are not easy to talk about.
In a recent survey conducted by the city, more than 50% of respondents said they don't believe the statue in Albuquerque should be returned to its original location. Additionally, Albuquerque's Arts Board voted 7-2 not to restore the controversial effigy to its original location. The board's recommendation now moves to the City Council. With similar uncertainty, the Oñate statue removed from Alcalde sits sequestered, while the populace of New Mexico continues to grapple with the best way to tell public history in an unbiased and honest manner.
If you want to have truth and reconciliation, if you want people to actually coexist, then you need to be really honest about the kinds of violence and the ongoing colonialism that Native people in particular experience in this state.